Well, good afternoon, everybody. Today we wanted to dig a little bit deeper into something that we talked about last Sunday. We talked about the idea that when Peter tells us to rid ourselves of malice and all those sins that sort of fall under the guidelines of malice, that the picture is of taking off dirty clothes and setting them aside. And we talked about on Sunday, Brett, how sometimes we're guilty of wanting to reach back over and take those bad habits, those sins, and put them back on. So today I thought we would just tackle that question of what happens when we feel the desire to start to pick up those dirty clothes and put them back on. So as a pastor, as a young man, what do you do when you notice that you're starting to creep back towards wanting those desires and those sins to play a role in your life again?
Yeah, well, I think that's a great question. I think that was a compelling part of the message. I think it's important that we remember that, first of all, we shouldn't be too discouraged when we kind of have that urge to pick up those dirty clothes again, because I think, even though we're redeemed people of God, even though we've been saved and we're going through the process of sanctification, it still is a process. And so the sin nature is still working, and we're still in a world that is just full of temptation and struggle, and so it's easy for us to want to resort back to something that's familiar. For me, what I try to do, and I think hopefully this doesn't sound overly simplistic, but is I just try to remember why it is I laid it down in the first place. So what sin does is sin like really shouts in the immediate, and it calls us to something to satisfy something that's immediate and like just now, but usually it has big consequences in the future.
Right.
And so what I try to have is this, the long view of understanding, okay, like if I truly trust that God's way for me is best, then, if I truly trust that if I stay within the will of God and I do what He says, that He's going to lead me somewhere good, I don't want to stray for that, because even though I may not get what I want right here, I'm ultimately going to get what I need and what I want down there. And so for me, I think it just is trying to take myself out of the moment and reminding, I laid this down because this was evil. I laid this down because this is not who I want to be. I laid this down because it made me miserable. I laid it down because the trade-off wasn't worth it. I laid it down for all these reasons. I'm not going to pick it up just because I'm in the moment, want it.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So, and I think it's a good thing because Paul talks about the sin that so easily entangles, and if we can remember how that sin entangled us, it helps us to look forward more.
Yeah.
Too. For me, I have to talk to somebody, and most generally that's Shelby or like somebody like a Randy Sturm, who I can just sort of unload on and get their perspective on something. If I'm struggling, if I'm getting frustrated, to be able to talk with them about it so that they can either confirm that, or most of the time saying, Tony, you need to redirect.
Yeah.
But for me, honestly, and we joke a lot about this, but for me, it's fishing. And if I find myself starting to get too deep and start thinking about things too much, it's time for me to go to the mountains, where I am surrounded by nobody but God and an occasional fish that runs into my spinner. But for me, it's that distancing and spending time with God. And I mean, we see in 1 Peter even all the amazing stuff that God has accomplished for us. And sometimes we are so quick to jump back in for immediate gratification and that type of thing that we forget sometimes about the promises God has made. But so it's important for us to have, for lack of a better term, coping mechanisms to keep us in the path that we're supposed to be in. So just some practical things. And so it's a remembering for Brett. It's a talking about it or going into seclusion for me. But you need to find what works for you in order to draw you back in. I think for both of us too, it's that remembering and that time of seclusion is grounded in God's Word. And God's Word, especially for me in the last 3 months as we've been operating differently. I mean, I shouldn't be, but I've been amazed at how God's Word speaks to the situations that we are in right now and constantly pulling me back and refocusing me. So we hope that helps, just a little bit of staying on this path, and when we take off those filthy rags, those dirty clothes, just leaving them there and being clothed with a righteousness that only comes through God. So we hope that we will see you on Sunday. We want you to know that for the month of June, we are making no changes to the way we're operating. While we would love to be able to set the masks aside in some way, just looking at all that's happening around our state, we don't believe that now is the right time to do that. So we're going to continue to ask you to wear masks and to register, to practice social distancing while you're here in the building worshiping in person. And we hope you do choose to come because we look forward to worshiping with you. So until Sunday, we say goodbye. And Sunday's Father's Day, so there's your reminder. Don't forget about Father's Day. But also, we encourage you to be here a few minutes early on Sunday because we have some things that we're going to start a few minutes before our start times just to celebrate and laugh a little bit together. So have a good rest of the week, and we will see you all this weekend, either here in person or on social media.